Hi, I'm Andy Jones, content editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint, and I'd like to welcome you to Paint Night Live, just 1 week later than it usually happens. So I apologize for not being able to teach last week, but thank you all for finding us and joining us this evening. And when I say joining us, I am here in the studio to teach you, and my good buddy Stephen White is here moderating, and he will be relaying your questions and comments to me as we go through tonight's lesson. So welcome, Stephen.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Andy.
Always a pleasure. So we are going to paint this little painting titled The World Is Your Oyster, and it is done on a 10 by 10 canvas panel, and it's a simple little seashell, got some fun action happening in the background. And it's kind of funny that we are doing an oyster in one of the few months of the year that doesn't have an R in it. So you shouldn't be eating oysters in months that don't have an R.
Is that a rule?
It's a pretty good rule of thumb. It has to do with ocean temps and harvesting and all that kind of stuff. So your chances of getting bad oysters are much lower in months with the letter R in it.
I've never heard of this. That's a good fact.
It's a cross between an old wives' tale and just good, policy.
Got you.
So we are going to start off by sketching our design onto our canvas panel, and I'm going to do this by using kind of the rule of thumb. So we're going to start about a big fat thumb's width down from the top, and probably 1, 2, 3 thumbs in from the side. So 1 thumb down from the top is going to be right about there, and then 3 thumbs in from the side is 1, 2, 3. All right, so I'm going to start and I'm going to draw kind of a very ragged pear shape. So we're going to start up here, and this is going to kind of jog in and out, come down here, and we're going to jog out further over this way. And it doesn't really matter. You just want kind of a lumpy pear shape or something that looks like a very lopsided potato, or a potato that's been squeezed at one end. All right, so this is the outside kind of look of our oyster shell. And then we are going to drop down inside, and we are going to kind of just sketch in a smaller pear that's going to have a wider margin up here at the top, and it's going to be a little bit narrower on the edges. And actually, this particular oyster that we're going to paint tonight has all sorts of beautiful kind of aqua and coral colors inside it, because to be really honest with you, an oyster shell just laying out by itself is not one of the most beautiful seashells that people might want to pick up. And we are going to paint a pearl in our oyster, so if you want to, kind of down here in the lower part of our oyster, let's see, that's about a big fat thumb's width in from the edge. I'm going to draw a circle. Now, drawing a circle is not the easiest thing to do, so I'm just giving it a little dotted line, and let me bring that up for a close-up so you can see that's about all the guide I'm going to give myself for this pearl. Now, don't get greedy and try to paint some giant pearl in your oyster. Let's try to keep it maybe about a thumb's width wide, so it's in relation to the size of our oyster shell. All right, so I hope that you are sketching away and getting ready to move on to the painting portion of our class tonight, but I'll give you just another moment to get your design sketched on there so that you don't feel like you're going to start painting without any indication of where you're headed.
Do you like oysters, Andy?
I do, but I'm not one of those people that'll sit down with a huge burlap sack of oysters and shuck and just eat them like that.
Yeah, I've never done that, but I've gotten them at the beach and stuff like that.
They're good. We have a very, very good seafood restaurant here in Atlanta, and we don't use that restaurant doesn't serve Gulf Coast oysters. Their oysters come from all over the states and up in New England and West Coast and all that kind of stuff. So they have their oyster person come out and talk to you about what you would like, whether you want one that's more briny or one that's more fatty or a meaty one, or it's like talking to somebody who knows about wine. These folks talk to you about oysters, and then you tell them what they want, and they bring these big trays out with all the crushed ice on it and your oysters, and they're amazing. So that, I will say, is good. All right, I think we are ready to start so that we can be finished in what we always lovingly call about an hour. So, that's just a suggestion that someone who was not me came up with. So I'm going to start by putting out some ink spot on my palette. I'm going to put out a big squirt of that. And if you don't have ink spot, you can use any kind of dark blue. I will tell you, ink spot is more, it has a more green tone to it than something like ultramarine blue. So I just thought this was a really nice color to use for that. And we're also going to put out a very kind of coastal tropical blue, which is called Calypso Sky. And for our background, we're also going to use a little bit of pure black. Now, let me give you the best, what do we call them, pro tip. The pro tip for tonight, which will make everyone's life so much easier. And your pro tip is, whatever you do, don't get paint on the inside of your oyster shell until we're ready to paint it. If you get this blue or black or stuff in there, then it's just going to take longer to cover, and it's just going to cause you to have more headaches. And no one needs that. All right, so let's take a deep breath and we will get started. I'm going to use a 3/4 inch flat brush. You use whatever big brush that you have. And we're going to do our background. We're going to paint it blue, then we're going to use our palette knife and add our light blue accents. And our background needs to stay wet to do this palette knife treatment in the background. So we're going to move at a pretty good clip so that we can get our, I'm going to need to leave this where it is. All right, enough talk, time to paint. So I'm picking up a nice amount of ink spot on my 3/4 inch flat brush, and I am going to go right around the outside of my oyster shell. And you can see that I'm doing that with great care. We're just kind of filling that in. And to make life easier for me, I taped my canvas down on a little bit of a larger canvas. Let me see if I can show you that right here. So you see I slipped my hand under there. But this way I can pick it up and paint and not get paint all over my hands. Many of you know that I am not a fan of paint all over my hands.
Speaking of canvases, Andy, we just had a question. What size is the canvas?
This is a 10 by 10. Now, you could do it on a 12 by 12 or an 8 by 8. It's up to you. You're just going to sketch your design on whatever size canvas you have. And Stephen is going to help me remember that when the class is over, the recording for this class can be seen on...
You can find it on our Facebook page. If you're watching on Facebook, it will live there.
Which is the Plaid Crafts
yes,
Facebook page.
Yes, this is the Plaid Crafts Facebook page,
okay.
And it can be found on the Plaid Crafts YouTube channel.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen.
Yep.
So I wanted to make sure that I was not giving out bad information. I hate it when I do that.
I got you covered.
You do, always. All right, so make sure to use an ample amount of paint because I am not expending any energy to cover my canvas. There's plenty of paint on there. Being a good Southern boy, I would say, put this ink spot on like you'd put mayonnaise on bread. Nice coating all the way to the edge. Is that a thing in your family, Stephen?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can usually tell if somebody isn't family or they're not from the South if they give you a sandwich where the mayonnaise doesn't hit the edge of the bread.
No, it's got to be full coverage.
Yeah, always. My dad and my uncle were not fans of sandwiches where the mayonnaise didn't hit the edge. My dad would be like, I don't know who made this sandwich, but it's dry.
I don't need it to be like piled high or anything.
It doesn't have to be piled high, but it needs to be to the edge.
Right. Exactly.
You don't want that edge to be neglected.
Paula says that you would be lost without Chris and I keeping you in line.
Oh, absolutely. I make no bones about that. That's why it's always good to surround yourself with great, great people. Alrighty, so I've got a fairly decent coverage on there, but there are light spots and there are darker spots, and I am perfectly fine with all of that. So I'm just going to set my brush down, set it aside, and I'm picking up my flexible metal blade palette knife. Now, some people will think that you can use a credit card or a hotel room key card that you have left over.
I don't think the hotel would appreciate that.
Well, I mean, people take them all the time. It's not the same. You need a metal blade palette knife that's very flexible. A popsicle stick won't work. A tongue depressor won't work. A knife from a package of utensils from your carry-out dinner won't work. Needs to be a nice palette knife. And we're going to set our palette knife down into our paint, and then we are going to tap, 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 and pat, pat, pat our palette knife on our palette, and that is going to help distribute the paint on the back of our palette knife and also remove quite a bit of excess paint. All right, now here we go. We're going to put this paint on, we're going to kind of smear it around, and then we're going to force ourselves to leave it alone as soon as we think it is okay looking. All right, so I'm going to start kind of near my oyster shell right about here, and you see how I just set that down, and we've got kind of a big spot of that on there, but we're not going to leave that alone yet. So we're going to put our palette knife down, and then as you can see, as I move my palette knife around, we are softening that color out into our background. Get a paper towel close at hand and wipe your palette knife off and come back to your little loading zone here. Pick up a little more Calypso Sky. Find a little place on your canvas where you can tap and rub that around. You see we're getting this really kind of very loose and abstract design in our background. Again, clean your palette knife off. Pick up some more Calypso Sky, and we can put that on there and just kind of soften it in a little bit. Wipe your knife off and pick up some more, and I'm going to let you all start working on this right along with me.
Andy, Linda wants to know if there's a paint kit available for Thursday night projects.
Yes, there is. It is the Paint Night Live kit, and it is available on platonline.com.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. That's always, it's always nice when people are interested in having the right tools and materials to paint along with our classes. It makes your life easier, and we can, paint pretty quickly because we're not really having to worry about what color paints that you have and what you might not have.
Is it Paint Night Live or Let's Paint Live kit?
It's Let's Paint Live.
Yeah, okay.
Because I get Paint Night Live and Let's Paint Live confused. Let's Paint Live is on the first Thursday of the month,
Yeah.
except when your instructor can't do it on the first Thursday of the month, and then it's a different date.
Yeah.
But Paint Night Live is on
Mondays.
Monday night. Okay. All right. So we try to keep all of this stuff straight, and it's confusing sometimes for us as well as it is for you, but there's just so much good content that we are trying to provide you with. All right, so I'm moving over to the other side of my canvas, and I'm just tapping some of this on. When it's kind of done its thing, wipe your palette knife off, pick up a little bit more paint, and put that on. And just kind of work it into the background a little bit. Try to be like Andy tonight and not overdo the whole thing. Where your paint is thinner, you'll have more of your Calypso sky staying clean, and where you've got more of your ink spot in there, it's going to kind of blend together a little bit more. But there is no way to get the same background twice, so put that out of your mind and just enjoy the kind of surprises that you get. Some might call that serendipity. All right, I'm going to probably need just a little bit of life down there. Where I grew up, we had a place called Shell Point, and the beaches were nothing but oyster shells. There was no sand on the beach. So not a good place for trying to run on the beach
Yeah.
without shoes on. And when I was younger and at the beach, they didn't have like those great little sandals that people wear in the ocean. You just wore your tennis shoes. So it's a little bit different back then. All right, I'm just looking at this to see if there's some place where I might want to really put a little extra effort into this background, and I might do a little something up here. And now I've got a big blob up there, which is not what I was hoping for. So I'm going to mess with it more than I should, and just try to soften that out so it's a little less, looks a little less traveled on. Okay, we are almost done with our background, but not quite. Not quite. We are going to put a dark area, and I should not have put this bit of light color on here. So watch me just take my palette knife and scrape and remove that excess highlight right in this area here, because this is suddenly going to become my shadow area of my background. So just scrape that off, and I'm going to pick up some more ink spot. Put that right over there. It's not hurting anything. It's not a big disaster. You trust me, I will tell you if I've had a big disaster. I learned a very long time ago that if you have a disaster and you are teaching a class, just go ahead and say, hey, I've had a disaster, and move on from there. But this was just a quick little change. All right, and so now I'm going to pick up a little bit of my pure black on my palette knife. And the same thing holds true with this as did for the ink spot, that we don't want to get it into our oyster shell, but I'm going to come right up next to the oyster shell and kind of tap and oh, look at me, got stuff in there.
Just after you made a big deal about
I
not
know,
doing
I
it.
should not have made a big deal about it, but you know, trying to help everybody. So we're going to kind of soften this black out into our background. And I just want to make sure that it's nicely softened out and it has a pleasant look to it. And I'm not going to mess with this much more. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of black and just kind of carry some of that a little further out. So that's what the black looks like on there, and you can see the Calypso sky on there. And you do want to do this in a pleasing manner, because A thing of beauty, Stephen, is what?
You lost me. I don't know.
Okay. It's an old quote.
I think the thing is you've ran this by me before, but I didn't retain it.
Well, you didn't know it was going to come up again.
No.
A thing of beauty is a joy forever.
Who said that?
Keats.
Okay.
Friggin', you're like, yeah, okay. I'm sure you've
I thought
heard
this
that.
was your friend Keats. I didn't realize you were saying somebody's last name, like some author or philosopher
It
or
is
something.
some author, a poet.
Okay.
He was part of the big three: Byron, Keats, and Shelley. Shelley.
Duvall.
Well, I was.
I know that's not the answer.
No.
That's just the first Shelley I could think of.
Mary Shelley.
Oh, okay.
There you go. So
Yeah.
it all ties together.
Gotcha.
So that was a throwback quote. All right. So now that we've moved away from our literary hour, we are going to dry our background with a heat tool or a hair dryer. This is going to take a minute because we put that paint on fairly thick, so just bear with me and just keep drying yours, and we'll be ready to paint in just a minute. Okay. All right, so do we have any questions, Stephen, about what we've done so far?
I think we're good.
All righty, it's time to put out some white on our palette. And I want to call your attention to something. Let me bring in the finished painting, because I want to show you that there's very little white on this painting. The pearl has some white on it. This is slightly off-white, and there's a little bit of white up here on the outside of the oyster shell. But that's about it. Right here and right here are the only white. So everything else is going to have a little bit of other color in our white. So it's never quite solid white.
Never quite white.
Never quite white. All right, so we're going to put a little bit of honeycomb out. And we will also go ahead and put out a little coffee bean. And I think that's all we're going to need out at the moment. So just trying to locate a brush here. This will work. So it's a 3/4 inch flat. Just a little bit different brush. So I'm going to pick up some white. And I'm going to add a little bit of honeycomb to that and a tiny little bit of coffee bean. It's mostly white, but not quite. Now, we are going to quickly, here, can you even see that that is a different color?
Just barely.
Okay, that's exactly what we want. Just barely, not really snow white.
Maybe when you put some more on there, bring it up again so that we can get a good comparison.
Okay.
We also had a request that we do more nautical paintings
Okay.
and tropical things.
I am not opposed to that. I've done some nautical things. Okay, that's too, I got it too dark. Right, but you can see that there's 3 different colors on our painting right now. We've got the white canvas, the color that I really wanted that you couldn't see, and then the color that's too dark. right, so I'm just going to add more white to this, and we're going to just kind of I'm going to keep adding more white to this as I brush this on. And I'm going right up to the line that's kind of the outside edge of the oyster shell. I'm going to leave my pearl free of paint,
And
sort of.
we have a question from Madeline.
Okay.
What can I substitute for honeycomb?
Substitute for honeycomb, you could substitute butter pecan, you could substitute country twill, you could substitute linen, any kind of off-whitish kind of neutrally color will work.
I had some honeycomb ice cream last night.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Have you ever been? We're going to be talking Atlanta here for a second. Have you ever heard of a place called Southern Custard?
No,
Okay.
but I mean, I make my own custard.
Maybe there's only just one. I don't know.
There could be.
But it's over by where I live, and I went there for the first time a couple days ago and got a tub of this honeycomb ice cream.
It sounds delicious.
It has little bits of it in there. Easily the best ice cream I've ever had.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I will keep that in mind.
They're not paying us to say this. This isn't an ad or anything. It's
All right, it's just two folks chatting about ice cream. All right, up here at the top of the oyster shell, I am going to this is the brush that I painted the inside of my shell with, and now I'm going to take one corner of the brush and I'm going to touch it into some coffee bean. So when I pat it out on my palette, I get one corner of the brush darker than the other side. So hopefully you can see that happening. But I don't want the inside of my oyster shell just to be brown. So we're going to gray it up a little bit by adding a freckle of black to that same corner of the brush. And then when I blend this out, I now have kind of a warm, nondescript gray color, which is exactly what I want. And we are going to tap and pat some of that grayish color up at the top of the oyster shell and blend, 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 softening that into the shell, but not trying to blend it so you can't see any brush marks. There are brush marks there to be seen.
Andy, back to honeycomb for a minute. Do you think that yellow ochre is off enough to
Yellow
work?
ochre is going to be a little too yellow. So, I mean, if you need to use yellow ochre, then you're going to need to add a little bit of some kind of purple to that yellow to tone it down.
Got you. Good
So
to know.
again, you're creating more work for yourself.
Good to know.
Yeah, because I know when you go to paint this later on, you want to make sure that you've got the right color. I tease Stephen about painting stuff because painting is not what Stephen is all about when it comes to artwork. He is a video guy, and that's where his passion is, and he is so good at that. And then he's also into, I guess, what we would call kind of doodling or quick sketches and things like that. But painting is not what he does not live for painting.
As you can see in Art Talk, I barely know how to hold the brush. So,
But that's okay. You have held a brush. I give you lots of credit for that. All right, let's shift down to like a little number 12 flat brush. But before we do that, let's dry this. I don't want to make a mess with this right yet. Right yet. That right yet sounded so
right yet
country.
works. We know what right yet means.
There is a guy from Mississippi who talks about things from the South, and he'll be like, let's discuss distance in the South. And so he'll start talking about things like over yonder, and one of his things that he always brings up is might could.
Oh, yeah.
He says you might could do that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, oh, that sounds so bad.
My granddad would give directions with, like, compass terminology.
Oh,
He would say, like, go
go
west.
go
I'm
we-
like, cool, I don't know where I am still, so, like, west doesn't help me. pop all.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I've taken my number 12 flat brush and I've got it damp with water. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of coffee bean and we're going to blend that on the palette. And so my brush has just got water on one half and a little coffee bean on the other. And I'm going to pick up a teeny tiny little bit of black. Black will overtake this in an instant. All right, so I've got like a blackish brown color. And what we're going to do, they're talking about strange turn of phrase. There was a German woman who had a cooking show on one of our local PBS shows, and she would talk about pick up your knife and all what you do is this. So, and she used an awful lot of canned soup in everything she made, but all what you do is put that can in there. So we're going to tap and pat a little bit of this brownish black color kind of out from around the outside of the oyster. All right, I want you to see what that looks like. Don't worry about the inside. We will clean that up and make our oyster, not our oyster, our pearl, very, very round. All right, I'm going to pick up a tiny, tiny bit more black just to have a little bit of a difference. And over on this side, I'm going to tap and pat that blacker color on the other side of my pearl.
Marissa came in late and asked if this class is going to be recorded. Yes, you can find it on the Plaid Crafts Facebook page and also on the Plaid Crafts YouTube channel.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing that information again. It never hurts because I'm sure that somebody meant to jot that down and just didn't. All right, so now you can see where we've got that kind of dark color coming out from behind our pearl. And I'm trying to keep this as easy and breezy as I can. It is not in my nature to have everything easy breezy. I always remembered from school, if you had to work a little harder at something, you tended to remember that lesson more than if it just came supernatural to you. All right, so we're going to take a little bit of this kind of washy color and I'm going to tap and dab some of it up at the top of my oyster shell. Then I'm going to rinse my brush, blot it out, and just tickle the edge just to bring this down. And this gives a very different look. It's a transparent wash of color rather than something that's blending into the color of the oyster shell. All right, so I'm going to let you get all of that stuff done, and then we're going to dry everything before we move on. Okay, that's nice and dry. So I guess we are going to move on to one of the prettier parts of the oyster shell, and that is adding in these colors that don't naturally happen in oyster shells. So this aqua and this peach tone, that's just artistic liberty that I had. And, well, everybody has, but I chose to do that because oyster shells typically do not have any sort of pink in them. So I've got some pink melon, and I've got a number 8 round brush. You could do this with a flat brush if you wanted to. I think the round brush might give us a little bit more interesting effect. All right, so I've picked up water on my brush, and I am going to simply right on the off-white section of the oyster shell, use the brush and simply dampen a nice wide swath of my oyster shell. And then I'm going to use my damp brush and I'm going to pick up a little bit of that pink melon. And I am simply thinning that out and we're going to touch a little bit of that on to our oyster shell. And that looks really, really red. Not what I want, so I'm going to blot my brush even more. And I'm just going to take that and smooth that tiny little bit of pink melon kind of around.
Can you bring your canvas up a little
I
bit?
certainly can.
Yep.
Can bring it up there. And I'm going to take a little touch of white in with my pink melon. And still the paint is very, very wet and watery. And we will, there you go, look at this. I'm just kind of sweeping this on, kind of using the side of my round brush. And it's blending and softening pretty easily there. And I'm going to just tap and dab, and I can swing some of that color around and then dab it to soften it. This is really not as difficult as it sounds. As long as you keep everything kind of wet, you can easily kind of move that color around. And you don't want the color to look like you have followed exactly around that edge. So you could see we've just got a nice wash of pink on there. And I can come in here and pick up some of that off-white that we undercoated our oyster shell with. And I can come right back in this area here and brush some of that kind of thin and watery light color on. And you can see that we've changed the color and we've now got a soft highlight area in there. So this is all just kind of damp paint moved on a wet surface, and we've got kind of very washy looks to this. And I was looking on Facebook today, and a friend of mine who lives in Florida posted a picture of all of the shells that she's collected this week, and it's kind of a pretty big haul. So lots of good shell collecting where she was. All right, we are going to come over here to the left side of our oyster shell, and we are once again using our number 8 round brush, and I am dampening the surface with water. And it is helpful for me to angle this so that I can see where my water is leaving my oyster shell nice and shiny. And I'm going to pick up a fly speck of Calypso Sky, and I'm going to go ahead and add just a dot of white to that. And we are going to tap and dab some of this aqua tropical blue color on, and you can see that I don't have very much on there. A little bit of Calypso Sky, tiny bit of white, plenty of water, and we want kind of this watercolory look. And I'm going to dab some of this on right over the pink melon that we had applied thinly to that, so you could see down there kind of how I just tapped and dabbed that on. I avoided the shadow of the pearl probably a little too much, so I'm just going to bring a little bit right back over that, and you can see right there where we've got that kind of cloudy look. Just brought a little bit of that in. And if you wanted to, I mean, the world is your oyster, and this is your painting. So if you want to kind of bring out a little bit more of that Calypso Sky, you can pick up some without adding any extra white to it, and dab a little bit on as you see fit. What we don't want are really harsh areas of this color. Anywhere that it looks harsh, you should come back with some more water and kind of roll the brush over the area and just let it soften out a little bit. All right, so there you have kind of those wonderful blushes of aqua and coral inside your oyster shell. And now we're going to dry that. Okay, I dried that, and now I'm going to let that cool off for just a second. And we are going to paint kind of the rim of our oyster shell. And it is not a pretty shell. It's not like a conch shell or a beautiful scallop shell, or not good with seashell names, but it's not one of those pretty shells. This is kind of a dirty junk shell, because I don't know anybody who collects oyster shells, but that's okay. So I'm going to use my number 8 round brush, and I'm going to pick up some coffee bean and a little black. I got way too much black. We just want to turn this to a brownish black color. It should not be solid black. And I've almost got solid black here. So adding a little bit more coffee bean. All right, that's what we've got. Now, I'm going to do one thing, and then we're going to start really on the outside of our oyster shell. But we are going to work on creating this interior dark line. All right, so we're going to do that first. So we're going to come right around, just let that trail out right over there, and then we're going to come right along that area where we had that super dark color. All right, now we're going to work on, you need to have some moisture in your paint so that it's easy to dab this color on. And we are going to pat and dab this dark color right around our oyster shell, making the inside interesting. Got to have an interesting shape, and the outside needs to be kind of lumpy. Again, coffee bean, black, and enough water to make this very fluid and very easy to apply to your painting. So come along the inside of the oyster shell, and let's make that attractive. Have a nice little wavy line. And then we're going to just fill in with this kind of brownish black color. All right, we're not taking forever with this. So we've got a few more things to do, but we're simply getting some color on this outside edge of our oyster shell. And it is very trendy now to either do some Mod Podge decoupage on your oyster shells, or paint the inside of the oyster shell. Not exactly sure when that became such a trend, but it is all over social media these days. And I'm just kind of wiggling my round brush, rolling it around, creating that nice kind of bumpy outside edge. And again, it's helpful to have your paint have a little extra moisture in it so that it glides on the surface pretty easily. All right, hold that up so you can get a close-up of my beautiful edge of the oyster shell. So that's nothing to write home about, nothing pretty there. All right, without drying this, I am going to pick up some titanium white, and I'm going to add a little bit more moisture to my puddle of paint, and I'm also going to add just a tad of black because mine was looking a little too brownish. All right, so here we go. Next step, we are going to start to dab on some highlights. So I'm going to start over here. This isn't terribly bright, but it's much lighter than what the edge that we had on there to begin with. And I'm patting and tapping and dabbing this on. Sometimes it goes all the way to the outside edge, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the time it does not come all the way to the inside edge of my oyster shell, but it's irregular in shape. Some of it's wider, some of it's more narrow. And up at the top of the oyster shell, I'm making this much wider. Okay, so that's what it looks like right now. And I'm going to dip my brush into water, come right back over here where I had that color that we just put on there. I'm going to dip my number 8 round into titanium white. So I'm creating another lighter value of that brownish, grayish black color. Dip my brush in the water, make this paint fluid, kind of nice and juicy there. It's not super thin, but it's got a little juicy consistency to it. And we're going to start down here. Remember, there's where we've got our shadow in our background. So we're going to have a brighter edge here. Leave some little holes in your highlight as you move around the shell. And I'll bring that up for you to see closely what I'm doing there. I'm just dabbing this lighter color on. I might skip a little spot and dab some more on. And then up here at the top, we're going to make this much lighter right there. All right, so that's what our oyster shell ought to look like right about now. I'm going to dip my brush into some more white. Come over here. So now we've got a much, much lighter color. Just get some of that dark that's coming out of the brush and come back with this lighter color. Maybe even add a little more white to it. These oyster shells are really kind of grayish, and that's kind of what I've got on my brush right now. And down here again, this is still just dabbing into that kind of damp color that's underneath it. And so we're getting a little bit of a blended effect, which is kind of nice. Just kind of tap and roll your brush around, getting some variation in that light area so you could see it right there. Kind of running together, just dabs on top of dabs over here. up at the top, we're going to make sure that we got a nice brighter area up here. And if it's not bright enough right now, don't worry, we'll dry it and come back and put some more light color on top of it. All right, so there is that lighter color on there. Now we're going to quickly shift to our number 2 script liner brush, and I'm going to use this light color here with the addition of some more titanium white in there. So we're making a really light color now. And this is much thinner in consistency. And some of you are already starting the initial portion of your panic attack, because we're going to do some fine line work, and don't let it throw you off. Oh, heavens, and I've got a brush that's got a extra long hair sticking out of it.
Going a little haywire.
Yeah, we're just going to hope that I can just overcome that issue here, but we're not going to stop. All right, so coming right around to the outside edge of our oyster shell. This is, well, and that is not going to be able to be overcome. So I'm going to set that brush aside and look over here and hope that there's a little liner brush over here that's going to cooperate with me. Here we go. Okay, let's hope that this little brush is cooperative. It happens to all of us, and I don't know what I've done to this brush either. It's probably not going to be much better. But with this thin light color, we're going to dance around the edge, creating a broken line. I got too much paint on my brush. Creating a little bit of a broken line. And it kind of bobs and weaves right along the edge. And if you look down, especially at the bottom there, you can see what kind of looks like a white or light blue line. That's this kind of tan line, and you can see how it doesn't quite line up with the outside of the oyster shell. And it is not a completely solid line. If you try to do a complete solid line, you will have an anxiety attack. Just let this kind of happen. So there you can see it up at the top too. All right, I'm going to go back to my number 8 round brush, and I'm going to make sure that I've got some titanium white, a little honeycomb, and some of my brownish gray color here. And I'm going to create a lighter line here. So I'm going to start right here, and right over that dark area, you can see that I've created a light line. All right, that's what we're doing. And I'm going to let that just kind of cross over and become part of the inside of the shell there. And over on this side, I'm going to carry that color a little bit further down. All right, so that's what we've got going on there, and you thought that was going to be super hard to do. It is not super hard to do. All right, so that's that part of the shell. And then up here, I want this to be a little bit lighter and brighter. So I'm going to wipe this paint out of my brush and pick up some titanium white and maybe a little bit of that gray color so it's not stark white. And we're going to dab a little bit of a highlight on up here. And I'm going to dab a little bit over here. And I can create a couple of little areas of highlights just by tapping and dabbing a little bit of this lighter color on over my drier oyster shell. All right, so you can see those little areas, some down here, mostly up here, and a little bit over there. And we've got one more thing to paint, and that is our pearl. And I thought I grabbed a little flat brush. There we go. I've got a number 8 flat brush, and I am going to just pull up my sleeves because we're getting down to serious painting here. I'm going to pick up titanium white on my number 8 flat brush, and we're going to paint the pearl solid white. Now, if you try to paint a circle with your brush, you're probably not going to be terribly successful. So I like to take my brush and make a C stroke, just part of the pearl at one time, turn my painting, do another little C stroke, turn the painting again. So it's easier to paint little sections than it is to try to paint a whole circle all at once. And then when you look at your painting, see where your circle is whacked out, because part of it will be. And then just start on the inside and scooch that brush around to make your pearl look nicely rounded. Okay, see how we've got a nice round pearl there? It's not perfect, but it's close enough for what we're doing tonight. Nobody's going to wonder what that is inside your oyster shell. All right, so let's dry that. And I'm going to rinse out my number 8 flat brush. And what I'm going to do is pick up some white on my brush and then put the corner of the brush into a speck of black, so that when I blend on my palette, I get a very soft gray color on one edge of the brush. All right, that's a very soft gray color, but we're going to soften it even more by adding a speck of Calypso Sky to the black corner of the brush. That really softens it up and adds a cool tone to that. Now I'm going to try to paint this while holding it up in midair. So chances are this is not going to work out as beautifully as I had hoped. But I'm going to take the corner of the brush, that's the right hand side of the brush, on the right hand side of the pearl, and I'm going to start and come around that side of the pearl and then just tap and pat a little bit of that shading into the pearl itself. And I may need to let that dry for a second and then come back and apply a little bit more darkness. And that's what the dark shading on the pearl looks like. It's not smooth, but when I wipe my brush out and pick up a little bit of white all over the brush, I don't want very much paint, and I can come back and as I skim or just tap some of that white on there, you get a very pearly look to your pearl. I know that was a bad pun, cliche, or whatever. My buddy Stephen did not provide the rim shot I was expecting. That'll be reflected in your paycheck. All right, so we're going to add a little bit of fun accent to our pearl because they often have lots of beautiful little iridescent colors showing on them. And hopefully anybody who loves pearls has been gifted a beautiful pearl necklace, and you can see the luster of the pearls. And I want to remind you that in order to keep the luster of your pearls, you need to wear them. So just that's your neighborhood jeweler giving you advice there. All right, so on the lower right-hand side of our pearl, I've once again picked up the cursed brush with the extra long hair, but I'm going to try to give a little bit of reflected light. Oh, that's not too bad. All right, so you see that little kind of line that I've added there to the right? That's just a little Calypso Sky in white. And then I'm going to take Calypso Sky and add a little glint on the pearl. Right there, you see that little glint right down there? That's Calypso Sky. And then I'm going to rinse my brush out and stop messing with that brush that I know I don't like. And I'm going to take a brush that I like slightly more, or I hate a little less. That's probably more what it is. So a little white and a speck of pink melon. And we're mixing up a very, very pale, pinky kind of coral color. And I'm going to put another little fleck of that inside the pearl. All right, so there you can see the speck of Calypso Sky and the speck of pink melon plus white. And if you want to and feel so inclined, you could take some pure titanium white, and we're not going to add a solid little highlight of white because pearls don't shine that way. But if you need to, you can simply just brush a little bit of white on and let some of that kind of fade out over your little bit of shading. So you can see more of it right there, but it's pretty light. But that's how we made that little pearl. All right, folks, that is it for The World Is Your Oyster. So hopefully you had some fun with us tonight, and we really appreciate you being here with us. We love our paint night classes, whether it's Paint Night Live or Let's Paint Live. However we're doing it live. So we want to thank you for this. And when you finish your paintings, if you'd like to, you can post them to the internet using the Let's Paint Challenge hashtag. And we love to see what you're doing, so show us your oysters. So thanks for painting along, everybody. Thank you for moderating, Stephen. And we'll see you next time.